in the ongoing quest into the fantasy heartbreakers. There's certainly this one, which is Of Gods and Men, which has kind of a Renaissance-y, floofy kind of swordplay thing going on in the front. Now, on the back, I kind of wrestle with myself on whether to share this with you. Okay, so there's this big pageant thing going on in the back here. Now, clearly, the faces of, I presume, the game authors and friends have been put onto the characters. And this is uncharitable of me. We were talking about 25 years ago in the mid-90s. And there was a particular look to the, I guess you would call it the proto-hipster of the time. Many of them came by that status, honestly, in the sense that they worked crap jobs and were overeducated and were, slowly sinking into the pit of the early public internet. Anyway, there's a particular look, and I got to know that look pretty well as I was moving into role-playing publishing. And anyway, those guys have it. And also, very much heartbreakery of its time of, it'll be so cool. We'll put our faces on the wizards and warriors in the back, which I appreciate as enthusiasm. Okay, so what are we looking at in this tome? Which, again, remember, back then, no print on demand back then at all. You wanted to put out a book like this, you paid through the freaking nose, and you got your print run, your stock, because there's only one way to have stock, and that's to make it and put it somewhere. No, I need, these guys ordered some copies, punch a button, or the automated, the guy punches a button and zoop, gets printed and sent to him. No, that's all the future. This is back in the past. So, however many they printed probably was in the realm of 5,000 to 10,000 copies, of which I am certain this is one of the few remaining. So anyway, how does this game go, and what is it about it that makes it appealing, insofar as across the range of the fantasy heartbreakers? What's appealing, or a feature of this one anyway, is that they went for very unexotic in terms of the setting and the options. You have, one might say, a standard fantasy continent, but it's actually a little more interesting than that. It's got understandable waterways and an empire in a proper spot for an empire, I think, and with a few different outlands, and one solid, dark and spooky foreign land in it. And everybody's a person. Did I say person? Everyone is a human. So there's one odd group of humans, but they are all supposed to be human, and there's no elf or dwarf or anything like that within sight. They creep up in the creatures in an interesting way. There are references to, the light elves or the dark elves or stuff in the text for other creatures. So you get the idea that the creatures may have been written and conceived independently of, or before they decided on their character options and their setting. And they were just had a book of creatures, for their D&D game, and, kind of ported it in. Or maybe, who knows, maybe the author who built that stuff was not really in communication with the final decisions about the other stuff. That's often the case when you have multiple authors like you have here. So what are we looking at? The Empire people are sort of Roman Americans, and the other options include the extremely Celtic, mohawked, tattooed, Celtic Highlanders. You have then your kind of more Outlander types who are another sort of barbarian. And then you have your watery people in the archipelago who have gone all fishy. They're tastefully wearing Speedos in the pictures. And They're, hairless and a little bug-eyed and stuff like that, but they are supposed to be a kind of human, not some deep sea, other kind of species or something. They're humans, but they're semi-aquatic. Okay. Then there's the spooky people I was talking about, which is in the thickly forested regions, and they constitute an economic power that's separate from the empire, and they live in these deep, frightening forests, and they have this horrific culture where necromancy is, if not normal, at least it's known, and the politics are, highly gendered, priesthood, clan leader, power jockeying, and they're the culture is very much a matter of, stab them before they stab you. So there's that. And then what do you do? The fortunately brief setting history is based on one idea. There was a war of the gods, and the gods went away. So I mentioned a priesthood a bit ago, and there are religions, but they are very, very of this culture. This is how we observe. This is how we ritualize our lives. Religions. They are not. It's deliberately not about you pray and you get a spell. You wield the divine forces and you channel them. Or none of that is in there. There are some branches of magic, and they are all treated as skills. So rather than metaphysical magic, they are very much a matter of harnessing the powers, the world around us as we know it. That's all settled. But the cool thing is that the gods have gone away. And now some few individuals are evidently divinely imbued. And this is expressed, and by the way, I mentioned how expensive it was to print. Well, this is what must have broken their bank unbelievably, because in the book, there are these cardstocks stuck in there, and you can punch them out if you want, which I have no intention of doing. This side are the cards, and you've got I think you saw it a second ago, the little of gods and men, divine power backings. And the idea here is that each player character gets a few cards. And your player characters are the divinely imbued, people in the setting. It is recommended, or at least highly implied, that there aren't any others. And that's kind of interesting, you say. So you're not picking from, classes and stuff like that, and then you're that kind of person because those kinds of people are in the setting. No, this is all about, divine stuff of gods and men. Okay, interesting. And the way that the divine power works, they're all basically, fairly dramatic moments. Reflect any single targeted spell back on its caster, complete heal, temporal disturbance, you get double your speed. So they're pretty, rule breaky, extreme applications of the rules, or things that override rules and stuff like that. Most of them couldn't be duplicated with one of the existing spells. Anyway, the point here, they also have a percent. Some of them are pretty high, some of them are pretty low. And if you roll that percent or less, then you get to keep the card and use it again when you want to. So something like Resurrection, returns any dead person to full body dodge and energy points. Well, anyway, so that's 5%. So if you, get that and you don't roll 5% or less, then you have to give up that card. That goes away. And otherwise, there are others that have much higher percentages. So the expectation is you'll probably get to utilize that for a while. So instead of having like 1 use or 5 use or something like that, it's a percentage. And you get more cards. as you go. It does say that, opportunities to get them are few and far between, but it also doesn't give too formal a return rate. And for purposes, as you'll perhaps see in a moment, or at least I can make clear in a moment, for me, I would say, well, few and far between means as much as I want. And that probably means more than they were thinking. You see, they provide, along with a number of other things, which clearly are the typical situation where somebody's stuck in class in high school or college and is bored out of their skull, and they just keep writing more spells and more combat options and more cool weapons and just keep going and keep going. And sooner or later, all that shit shows up, in here. So there's a lot of that. What about these divine cards, though? They don't take any resources to use. That's one thing. You just toss down your card and you don't have to spend anything. And you may retain that ability, or it may go away, and in the fullness of time, I think you have, a handful of them to start. So it's not really like you're completely bereft of them probably at any time. And it's actually the changeover, I think, that's more interesting than the retention. The idea being, I think, that you're kind of getting you're just so freaking divine that you can do anything, maybe not that thing every time or when you want, or be able to do it again. But in the fullness of time, we see you do a whole bunch of wacky, rule breaking shit. Okay, but that's just you and the other player characters. Now, there are two interesting dials that get to be turned for your table playing this game. And one of them is what's really going on. What's the divine nature of things? The authors, or that particular author who conceived clearly this whole framework for play, gives a really nice rundown for all of the metaphysical underpinnings of the universe in terms of options. So you, as the person who's organizing this particular game of Gods and Men, decides and says, the gods are coming back. And this is the harbinger, these kinds of effects are evidence or are indicators that the gods are coming back, and it's going to be the gods, that you read about in the beginning, as well as whatever soap opera you want to ladle on top of that. But the point is that they're going to be encountering kind of these up and coming gods in the form of the player characters. And so there's going to be some kind of interaction about that. So that's one thing. But that's only one option of a whole bunch that the author gives you. The other one says, it's all bullshit, and who knows what these things are, but basically your characters are going to redefine and reshape, important matters for the cultures. And so the metaphysical explanation doesn't matter at all. What matters now is what happens to religion, what happens to society, because we have these self-identified or arguably, divine activities. So that's a whole nother option. But there's a whole bunch of these, and they're all quite thoughtful. And so it's neat. You get to choose, what the metaphysics of the setting are, and therefore what these powers would mean from that point of view, from okay, so what is all this? But that's only one dial, is choosing one of those. The other dial is per character, and it's chosen by the player. And it has to do with how does your character look at himself or herself in terms of these powers. And some of them are quite interesting in that they say, well, I am part of the institution of the culture, because you see, you've chosen which culture your character has come from. And you would say, okay, well, this is the religion of that culture, which is listed there, and I'm part of that. I am rocking in terms of that theological language that I grew up with, and I believe. And so all these powers are all part of that. Now, this is also interesting by culture, because the Pythian Empire is fairly secular, and its religion is, supposed to be kind of boring and, not get in the way of important shit. So if a person starts doing that, they're going to be regarded in the Pythian Empire as this fucking scary fanatic. Whereas if they are in some other very spiritualist or very, where the religion is considered part of the power structure, well, then they are going to be embraced in that sense by the populace. And the book is quite clever in pointing out that religious institutions have their own goals, identities, structures, and they don't necessarily take well to somebody in it who's not part of the hierarchy, who prances around saying how important they are in it, right? Or you could choose, for example, to be an atheist and say, I don't buy it. I mean, I have these powers and I'm going to use them for what I want, and it has nothing to do. Everybody might be calling me, the young god or something like that, but screw them. So how that relates to each one of the different cultures, is listed. So, or in terms of, if you come from a culture with, a hardcore hierarchy of religion, it means this. If you come from a more secular area or type of way of looking at things, then it means that. So you look at your character, you look at the culture that you've chosen for them to be from, and then you choose one of these attitudes, and then that dial, the attitudes, and that's different per character, whatever the players want, gets juxtaposed with whatever the metaphysics are that the game master has chosen is the case for this table, this application of this setting. Now, all of a sudden, the extremely, I'm not going to say humdrum, because actually the Pythian Empire and the people from Nilbray Forest and the amphibian people, and then the two kind of cool barbaric cultures, they're pretty cool. I mean, it's well done. You choose your skill, what skills cost in terms of skill points is different for each culture, and some of them have skills or magic that the others don't. And then there's also a minor system for cross-training. So you say, I'm from here, and you might just get skills from that list, or you might say, I really like that skill from that other culture, and then you see what you do to get, kind of I have some contact with that culture. So you've made a pretty solid character, and if you get into their skill sets, like you say, I'm an herbalist, and you get deep into that herbalism thing, or you say, I am, a soldier, and you go through what it takes to be a soldier in that particular culture. It's got a nice grounded feel. I mean, you say, oh, this is a nice solid, one of those kind of realistic fantasy games. And it could have stopped there. I mean, they could have said, oh, we've got a kick-ass herbal system. Oh, we got some kick-ass magic systems with its little PowerPoint economy all worked out. Got our skill point costs per culture all worked out. A lot of games would have stopped there. But to throw in this business with these divine power cards and the way they work, plus the business about choosing what the metaphysics of the setting even are, and then choosing per player how your character that you've made from whatever cultures is going to relate to having these powers. Wow. That's kind of interesting. It's a solid, premise. You say, I want to play that. That's going to be one of these, this sounds like it could get epic. It could get, very personal. It could get very tragic, or it could. Now, there are several things that then the book makes me kind of grind my teeth about. First of all, there is wading through the hefty, the micro nuances of every single subsystem, because whoever did those really cared about the difference between Hollyhock and Hemlock, or the difference between, this particular mode of magic at this particular level versus that mode of magic at that particular level. And it's not a joke. You're going to have to learn that stuff. So first of all, is working your way through that. And then there's the parts that, as I mentioned before, don't really quite seem to have been written for the same game. Whether they fit or not, when all is said and done, well, they might. But that's not because somebody tried to make them fit, is all I have to say. The wide range of creatures, the wide range of um, the the wide range of things to do in there mostly is about creatures and races that kind of look like they got retooled or reconceived from, or at least aesthetically, arose from either the same or directly from the Fiend Folio. So you've got this wide array, and you're kind of like, why are all these like grotesque semi-humanoids running around, when that sort of goes against the coolness of living in all across all these human cultures, and suddenly discovering that people that you're divine, or you think you're divine and other people don't, or other people think you're divine and you don't, or whatever it may be, and you just keep on getting more and more consequential because of this. You matter to the human culture. Well, who cares if these little bat-eared, warty goblin guys like pop up from behind a bush and ambush you? I don't get how that matters. Do you want wealth? How do you get wealth? Do characters like this go running off into the Canebrake looking for some, dragon to go slay and take all of its gold? Or do they work in the cultures that they're in and do stuff in some complex or highly obligatory way on someone's part that has social ramifications? I would go for the latter. That sounds like more fun and more relevant for what the game seems to be about. But to the authors, it seemed clear that they came up with these great ideas, and at the same time they or some among their complement, some members, just couldn't get away from the idea that all people really want to do is run around in a funny looking group and go and kill a thing and look under things and duck and cover when something blasts them and stuff like that. So there's that kind of odd disconnect between a great deal of the material, especially the stuff about what to do. There's nothing in here about engaging with a social hierarchy. There's nothing in here about building the loyalty and coping with the loyalties and disloyalties of people, either in small groups as individuals or en masse, all of which seem pretty relevant for those concerns I was talking about. So it's kind of like, we have this epic, and go look in that hole and see what's there. And you're kind of wondering, which of these rule sets kind of rules the roost. I confess I don't know. But I'm quite interested in playing to discover that. And I'm also wondering maybe if I'm being a little unfair and saying, I'm looking at these, here they are, right? You've got the Minotaurs, who are spelled Mina for some reason. And they've got, all sorts of stuff about, these Minotaurs you can fight, and you're kind of going, why am I fighting Minotaurs? Where, well, let me go back to that setting, right? Where's the setting material? And there's all these cultures and all this cool map and stuff. And there ain't a Minotaur in sight. So what the hell? So anyway, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe when I look deep in those paragraphs about the Mina Minotaurs, I will grasp that these are perfect for conflicts that involve all those other issues in some way. That just, a bunch of interesting humans from the archipelago wouldn't be. Well, I'm curious and interested. And also, whether the whole business, okay, we're fighting, we take damage, doesn't matter if I take damage. What, maybe it does. I kind of like the idea. You take a whole bunch of damage, and somebody in the group, you've got maybe 5 players, each one has 2 to 4 cards at the moment, and the divine stuff that starts getting thrown around at that point. Not just of, well, I took a lot of damage and we want to make it through this fight, so hey, you spent your card and I got all these points back. That's great. That's not quite what I mean. I mean more in terms of its social importance, its consequence. So who knows? Maybe a good dust up with Minotaurs is exactly the right context for these cards to start zipping around in a more social way in terms of social stuff in this setting. I don't really know. I don't see that connect at this point, but that's me sitting in this chair and not in the same chair in the course of play. Well, anyway, so I'm intrigued, and I'll be curious to know through checking it out. Again, it's more stuff to learn.